Hello everyone. So this particular video will focus on mixed methodology. Now this is something that I would not necessarily recommend as part of a dissertation project. So when we use mixed methodology, it's typically in quite large scale projects. So maybe when you have a number of different researchers involved in a project, or when you're actually doing something over a longer time scale like a PhD. But if you're doing a dissertation, which generally collects the data over a very limited time period, usually of a few months, there usually isn't scope to actually use the mixed methodology. So just something to sort of bear in mind in the background, to not sort of rush into attempting this and thinking that this might be a better option. So first of all, just need to clarify there is a difference between method and methodology. So your methodology is your overall approach. This is about the strategy, what methods you're using, the sampling approach, the analysis, the research paradigm. Okay, so it's the overall strategy and approach. Whereas method is the actual research instrument, the tool you will use to collect your data. So that could be a questionnaire, it could be an interview, a focus group. Okay, so mixed methodology actually refers to when you use more than one method or more than one methodological strategy. And the idea is that, by combining either more than one method or more than one methodological strategy, you actually are able to better tackle a particular research problem. But as I say, it's not something I would, ever recommend someone to do in a dissertation because of the timescale involved. And it's always much better to focus particularly on using one methodological approach and one method and doing that well. So, but having said that, there can be occasions where it might be necessary or appropriate in a study, and it's something you should talk carefully about with your supervisor. So the reasons we might do it is, you can often get a much more holistic, complete view, as it says there, of the problem. And sometimes there are different parts to a research problem that require different approaches. So as I say, it tends to be in larger, more complex projects. So, if you've got a number of different elements to your research problem in your dissertation, then I would suggest that you pick one element to focus on. Sometimes we have stages in a research project, and I'll show you some examples in a moment, where you might need a different approach at different stages. And the final thing there is sometimes one method helps inform the design of another research instrument. And again, I've got some examples of that for you. So broadly, there's these 4 different mixed methodology strategies, and I'll talk through each of these in turn. You can quite often, design these in right from the start, but occasionally they are emergent. They come up in response to particular project needs. And multi-phase approaches essentially are ones which might use different strategies at different phases, which is the 4th one on the list there. So let's just go through these other 3 now. So first of all, sequential. So sequential mixed methodology is typically where you use one method and that is followed by another method. And often they're linked in some ways. So in my PhD, I looked at social representations of residents and visitors' mobility patterns in tourism. And I began with in-depth interviews with local residents. And what I was trying to do is understand the context from their perspective as people living in a tourist destination. And then following on from that, I wanted to actually explore things with tourists. So I got them to do a travel diary, which captured a mixture of qualitative and quantitative data. So some of it was sort of quite factual, how far they'd travelled, the kind of quantitative part, and some of it was their explanation of what they'd done and descriptions of what had happened. So that was qualitative. And then both those 2 first stages, so those interviews and the travel diary, they then informed a questionnaire that was sent out to tourists, which was quantitative. Now, the whole project used an inductive approach. So even in quantitative research, you can use an inductive analysis strategy. So, from a methodological point of view, it was an inductive study and it used a post-positivist research paradigm. But it used this sort of sequential approach to different methods, with the first 2 methods informing the questionnaire design. So the questionnaire design was based on the findings from the first 2 stages. Then a concurrent example. This is from a more recent project of mine when we were trying to understand visitor travel patterns and the scope for travel collaboration in tourism. And in order to understand this visitor travel behaviour, we used two approaches at the same time. One was GPS tracking, so we used a smartphone app, and that gave us quantitative information about where people had been and the time that they were travelling. And then we did narrative interviews, a day in the life of. We asked people about their previous day and what they'd been doing, and got them to talk to us about, in some detail, their experiences. Okay, so they were kind of, both done at the same time, but one quite quantitative, the other one actually much more experiential. And then an embedded example. I don't actually have examples of this. I don't tend to do this kind of research myself, but the kind of example here, you maybe undertake a questionnaire survey. Maybe you're looking at something like something related to sports participation, and your questionnaire survey reveals a significant gender difference. And then you could do something like use in-depth interviews to explore and understand this difference, to try to see what's sort of going on there from that initial quantitative finding. Then multiphase, this, as I say, often sort of wraps things in at different stages of the project. So, in our project, when we're looking at using a smartphone app in tourism for collaboration, this began with some in-depth interviews, and we used these to inform the design of the smartphone app. And then in a second phase, which was a completely separate study, we actually used a questionnaire to analyse collaboration concepts, and we wanted to understand if these varied by the tourism context that people were in. So these were actually two standalone studies, although they both actually were, informing our overall project. And in terms of analysis, obviously a lot depends on the strategy you're adopting, but quite often we will merge data, often in the discussion. So, for example, in my PhD, I had separate sections presenting my interview data, my travel diary data, and then my questionnaire data. But then I had a discussion that brought the three different findings together. Then sometimes you connect data, so in a sequential design, so where my interviews in my PhD informed my questionnaire design, in that case there was a connection between that data. So you present the findings of the interviews first, but then you draw what the material that's drawn out of that then feeds into the design of the questionnaire. And then there's when you've got embedded data, so where you've got, say, a qualitative study that's been used to explain the findings of a quantitative study, then what you will do is in the presentation of that quantitative data analysis, you will embed some of the qualitative findings which will help explain the patterns that you've found. So yeah, final comments here, not really recommended for a dissertation. You do need to map out quite carefully the relationships between the different methods and how this is going to hang together, and also how you plan to integrate the data and analysis. But as I say, really what I would suggest for a dissertation is you actually pick one part and focus on that, because you will almost undoubtedly find that you would be overwhelmed by trying to do more than one method and to do them well.